Shabbat Shalom. Let's learn this week's Torah portion with Rashi's commentary. We're in Parshat Shlach Lecha in the book of Numbers. Chapter 13 begins with God speaking to Moses, Moses clarifying, making the decision to send 12 spies into the land of Israel so that they could get a report back to the Jewish people about whether this is all possible. The idea that there are 12 leaders among them does not mean that everyone will have faith, will be strong in their determination, that they can indeed accomplish what God has promised, that they take the human partnership and say that, you know what, we will meet this challenge, we'll overcome. In fact, we know that the spies themselves create a crisis of confidence. They undermine the first generation, and they'll have to live with that consequence. You can listen to my other teaching this week to hear more about that. The names of each of those 12 members is provided on a list at the beginning of the Parsha to say that they each have to be accountable for their own opinions and their own reports and their own participation in this holy mission. But Moses wants to bring a divine measure of protection for Hoshea bin Nun, for his student, his disciple, the one he has eyes on as potential leader of this people. And he wants to amplify that possibility that Hoshea has a certain relationship with God and the divine and can have faith even when he's challenged by his compatriots, by his colleagues, by those he's scouting the land out with. Even when they're going to make a report that really creates the crisis of confidence that the first generation goes through, feels like grasshoppers in the eyes of those who live in Canaan. They belittle themselves by way of their own capacities to fulfilling the promise that God made. And the Torah teaches that so that we have agency and we have the ability to make our own decisions and to create a certain kind of partnership with God from the human side in order to fulfill the great hopes and plans of God in Torah. But here, Moses wants to stack the deck, and he wants to make sure Yehoshua has an extra measure of faith, and he does that by adding a letter onto his name. He doesn't take him aside, and we don't have the language of complete blessing. But what we do have is Moses adding a letter to Hoshea's name to make it Yehoshua. Hoshea becomes Yehoshua. That's where we get to Joshua in our tradition. Seeing the group assembled and recognizing that indeed there might be some type of challenge that they'll have to confront when it comes to the majority of leaders thinking they'll never accomplish this task, this mission of inheriting the land. Moses turns to Joshua and says, I am going to bless you, that you should see through divine eyes, that your mindset should be about God's great promise. And this letter Yud is coming to just add that holy dimension that you need in order to maintain your faith and your strength, even in the face of the challenging and evil report on the land of the spies who say, no, we can't do it. We can't get it done. So Rashi says that Moses, when he added the Yud, nitpalel alav ya yoshiacha me'etzat miraglim. Moses just understood that the miraglim, the scouts, would come back and undermine the forward progress of the Jewish people at the time. But Joshua, he says now to Hoshea, you will be known as Yehoshua. It will be God who will save you. Ya Yoshiacha. God really save you from falling into that trap of negativity, that pit of powerlessness. And, you know, isn't it true that sometimes we need that extra measure of finding the strength, finding the divine strength to continue in the face of all that seems so negative and like darkness is taking over, like there's just no personal strength we can find to overcome the greater forces against us. Well, the Torah suggests that if we will find that power in a yud, we will find some extra power to stand up to the negativity that confronts us. And perhaps that's why Adonai is yud and yud together. That it's someone else who's got that strength and faith, and the little yud in you, the little power of the divine within you that you've been blessed with by people who love you, by our ancestors, by Moses proverbially blessing all of us with a little bit more of that divine light within each of us. It says about the idea, Joshua was, of course, one of 12, and he had a partner, Caleb, who also demonstrated great faith. It says that we should always be looking to kanela chaver. We should be looking to acquire friends. It would be good to acquire friends who have a little bit of that touch of holiness within them, that yud, that coupling with another person of faith can sometimes really add dimensionality to our lives. So the idea that in Pirkei Avot it says, find someone who can be a friend, the Avot Rabbi Natan commentary really does explain that. That's finding a friend that you can call a holy friend. And Joshua became that holy companion to Caleb in the story of the spies, who did demonstrate strength and faith of his own in yet a different way. The Masorah the tradition is that Caleb was much more connected to the history of the Jewish people, to Abraham and Sarah, the Avot and the Imahot, the idea that he was part of the lineage of these great, great, great grandparents who really held the promise of Eretz Yisrael. Joshua was going to go in and make some determinations militarily about whether this can be done, and that's what the book of Joshua is going to be about later on in the Tanakh. He needs to have faith that indeed God's promise is true, that the Jewish people's partnership can make it happen, that they have the agency to inherit the land, and that God's promise stands as a blessing for them all, in the face of what the scouts will ultimately say. And Moses foresees that and blesses him with the yud, as we are blessed with a little bit more divine light by studying this week's Torah portion with Rashi. So should we find the strength and the power to stand up against negativity and not fall into any crisis of confidence because we lack faith. Shabbat Shalom.